What's going on, everybody? I'm Johnny Brook, and welcome back to part number 2 of the Kinda Tiny House build series. So in part number 2, I'm going to be covering getting all of the layout work done for this building. Basically, that means finding the 4 corners of this structure here in my backyard, as well as setting up a string line at grade, which is basically the final height of the top of these piers. And speaking of the piers, the other thing I'm going to be covering is digging all of the holes for these footings and piers with an excavator. And this was my first time ever driving an excavator, which was a ton of fun. Also, before we get started, I want to say a huge shout out to AMD, who sponsored this video, and stay tuned till later in the video to learn more about the AMD powered laptop I used throughout this project. So without further ado, let's go and get started with this video. So as you might remember from part 1, I had already laid out a rough string line where the guest house would be built so that the arborist could figure out which trees needed to be removed. And this line gave a good rough estimate of the location, but now I needed to set up the actual building layout with a string line set to final grade, which in my case was the top of the concrete piers. To start, we first double-checked the location and found out we needed to make a small adjustment to bring the building parallel with our main house. And when I had originally laid out this rough string line, I had pulled my measurements off of our fence line, but as it turns out, our fence isn't quite parallel to our house. After making this adjustment, I double-checked the setback from the fence line one more time because it has to be 20 feet in my neighborhood, and then we could move on to getting our line laser set to grade.
So it'll be like 22 through there. Parallel to your house and not parallel to your fence.
Yep. So first we set up the laser on our fancy job site tripod, aka a paver on top of a stump, and then check the drop from one corner of the building to the other corner at the far end.
At the foot.
Okay.
46 inches.
Man, so a 3-foot drop.
Since the drop ended up being about 3 feet, and since I can't have my ridge height on this building higher than 16 feet based on HOA restrictions, and since the floor joists have to be at least 18 inches off of the ground based on code, we decided to dig out the ground on the high side of the building, digging down roughly a foot. And we just dug down in the area around the stakes initially, but would end up grading this entire area later on once I rented the excavator, which you'll see later in this video. Next, we can move on to cutting a bunch of stakes for our batter boards, and I had already pre-cut a few stakes before Eric showed up, but evidently I didn't do it quite right. So since I had cut the stakes using a miter saw, the angle was only on 2 faces, which would cause the stake to be pushed sideways when pounded into the ground. And Eric used a circular saw here instead to cut a perfect point on the stakes, and this made for a much easier to drive stake. And speaking of Eric, I guess I should go ahead and introduce him to y'all, since you'll be seeing a lot of him in the next few videos. This is Eric Perkins, and Eric and his brother Jamie own Perkins Enterprises, which is a custom home building company here in Western North Carolina. They also have an awesome YouTube channel called the Perkins Builder Brothers, where they cover their construction projects, offering tips and tricks based on their years of building experience. And I stumbled across their channel when doing research for this build, and after becoming buddies, Eric offered to help out on this project. All that to say, you'll be seeing a lot of Eric and some of the Perkins crew over the next few videos, and if you want to learn more about construction stuff while watching some entertaining videos, you should definitely go subscribe to their channel. Anyway, with some stakes cut, we could move on to setting them in place around the corners of the building. And instead of just using 2 stakes and having the batter boards run diagonally, which is what I thought we'd do, Eric instead recommended using 3 stakes at each corner so we could create an L-shaped batter board. So yeah, like I said, the only problem with that, when you go to dig this, you're gonna have to like get under it with your bucket, which is gonna be sucky.
Yeah.
And this helped to keep the stakes and batter boards out of my way when I dug the footings with the excavator, which you'll see later in this video. We ended up setting the stakes off of our string line by about 3 feet, again to get them out of the way of the excavator.
Oh!
And we also made sure our stakes were long enough at the tall end of the building so that our string line would be able to be set to grade. Once all of our stakes were set, we could mark our actual grade on each of the stakes, which was 12 inches below our laser line. And we had to do it this way because otherwise the ground at the high end of the building would have blocked our laser.
What? There you go, yeah. Oh, man, right there. Yeah.
After marking, we could attach our batter boards, but first we needed to dig through my scraps to find the material we needed.
I think that'll get it. You're pretty much out anyway, so.
I mean, I've got these little trim boards.
Yeah, bring them. One thing I'll say is I've definitely built forms out of everything.
Okay.
Even pieces of tree limb on the property when I run out of stuff.
Why not?
Next, we could attach the batter boards flush with our marks, and this set each of the batter boards to our final grade so that we could then run our string lines off the top of these batter boards and know they were also at grade. We repeated this process at the other 2 corners, and then we could set the stakes on the high corner. and we used stakes here rather than batter boards so that we didn't have to dig out this entire area by a foot just where the string would run. Finally, with the stake set and the batter board set up, we could get our first string line set, and this was our reference line, again parallel to our main house. Also, Eric showed off his ninja reflexes.
Ooh, look at that.
Once the nail was set in the batter board, we needed to tighten the string so that it didn't sag in the middle over this pretty long 48-foot span, and Eric had a great trick for temporarily tightening a string line.
If you want to pull strings real tight, get your approximate length, make a loop, do a couple twisties, and then you can use the force both ways. You can pull here and here at the same time, so you can get it really tight, and then pull it back, and just let go of it.
Oh wow.
Then when you want to take it off, there's no knot in it.
Man, clean.
After setting the first line, we double checked the measurement again off of the house one more time just to make sure it was parallel.
You can't really double check yourself too much, I'll say that. Once you've dug holes and poured concrete, it's hard to move.
Finally, we could set the string on the stake to grade, and with that, we finally had one of our string lines set, which only took about 2 hours.
So we got one line there. Thinking it's probably about lunchtime.
Yeah.
We got 10:07.
10:07.
Let's do it.
Time to get a beer?
Yeah.
Go down to burial?
With the first line set, things went more quickly, and we could reference all of our other lines off of that first line, and we started by setting the other line parallel to our first line. We also decided to add a little diagonal bracing to the stakes and batter boards at the tallest corner of the building, just to keep them from moving around when we pulled our line, and we had to get a little bit creative with our bracing material here.
Is I've definitely built forms out of everything, even pieces of tree limb.
With the bracing added, we pulled the string line, and then we could set the shorter lines at each end of the building. To do this, we made a mark on the line at one end of the building, and then pulled a long tape measure and made a mark at the final length of the building, which is 48 feet, at the other end of the string line. We then pulled a diagonal line to mark the location at the other corner of the building, but first we needed to calculate our diagonal measurement. And because I love 3D modeling, I had gone ahead and modeled this entire building in SketchUp prior to doing this layout work, so I could easily pull my diagonal measurement from my model. If you don't have a 3D model of your building, you could also use a calculator like the one on learnframing.com, or an app like Construction Master Pro, all three of which would figure out this number for you. And in our case, the diagonal measurement was 49 feet, 5 3/4 of an inch.
Okay. You want me to toss it to you?
Yeah.
Boom! Oh, look. Wasn't quite as heavy as I thought.
After pulling the diagonal measurement, we pulled the straight measurement from that diagonal mark to mark the final corner, and then checked our diagonals in both directions, and these numbers were off by about 1/4 of an inch. And after struggling moving around our lines trying to correct for this, we finally came to a realization of an error we had made when setting the batter boards.
This is the perils of burning an inch. So my original mark I didn't burn an inch. I scratched it out, made another mark. We still put it on my original mark. So this is an inch off. Because we were looking and say, this looks a little wrong. It's only 1/2 inch difference over here, but still.
Double checked it though.
Yeah.
So much better.
After fixing this, our diagonals lined up perfectly, and we ended up with a nice square corner after setting the line at this end of the building.
I mean, I think it looks pretty good. I can't even hold it steady.
Pretty good.
I didn't drink enough coffee.
Finally, we could set the last line at the other end of the building, and we also set the position of the last stake at the same time. We also decided to go ahead and move the other stake back by a couple feet, again just to get it out of the way of the excavator. And with that, our layout was officially done with our string line set to grade, which was again at the top of the piers in our case, and next we needed to go ahead and lay out the locations for those piers and footings. My architect, Rick Caseby, had already laid out these footing locations on the building plans, which we do have for sale in case you're interested in building a building similar to this, and I'll link to those in the video description below.
So that'd be your sonotube right there.
And so we knew both the locations and the size of the footings based on these plans. And that made this layout process pretty simple, just referencing off of our string lines and using marking paint to mark the locations. One thing we didn't realize though was just how large the 18-inch sonotubes we had originally specified were going to look.
Wow, that's big.
That's big, man.
Wow.
Just laid out this first sonotube here, and I had decided to go with 18-inch sonotubes when I had initially just wrote the things on the building plans. But now that I've actually sprayed out the 18-inch diameter, that seems pretty huge. So just called the engineer and he confirmed that 12-inch sonotubes should work just as well for this project. So we're gonna change to 12-inch diameter, which is gonna, I think, just look a lot better just because it won't be this huge post sticking out of the ground.
We laid out the footing again, and this looked a lot more reasonable.
30. That ought to do it. That is a monster.
So it was pretty simple to reference the string line when it was near the ground, but once we got to the tall end of the building, we had to get a little bit creative.
I mean, it makes sense, dude.
Something right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
We repeated the layout process for the rest of the 10 footings, and while we're doing that, let's take a second to talk about the sponsor of this week's video, AMD, and the AMD-powered Dell Inspiron 14 7000 2-in-1 laptop I've been using in this video. I've been extremely impressed with this laptop's performance so far, with the new AMD Ryzen mobile processor allowing me to run all of the programs I needed for this project simultaneously, including some fairly resource-intensive 3D modeling softwares. The 13 hours of battery life have also allowed me to use the laptop all day without having to be tethered to power, which was great for working on site. Another huge plus of this particular laptop is the touchscreen and the screen's ability to fold back, which is called tint mode. And this is something I didn't realize I was missing when doing this type of work, but being able to manipulate the 3D model I was working on made having a touchscreen here a huge bonus. All of these features combined with things like a built-in SD card reader, USB-C port, and an HDMI port really makes this a great choice at an awesome price point. And if you'd like to learn more about this AMD-powered Dell Inspiron 14 7000 2-in-1 laptop, check out the link in the video description below. Again, big thanks to AMD for sponsoring this project, and now let's get back to the build. After getting all the footing locations laid out, it was time for the fun part, digging the footings.
Well, I think that looks pretty nice, Johnny. I think I'm gonna get out of here before the digging takes place though.
Oh man, I got 2 shovels.
Did you know shoveling is hard work?
I've heard.
We'll see you next time.
Hey man.
To help with the digging, I decided to rent a machine I had never used before, a mini excavator. And I was honestly shocked I could just go rent one of these machines with no prior experience. I just had to sign the damage waiver and the machine was mine for a week for the cost of $1,000, which included the trailer. After getting the excavator home, I could get it unloaded, and my little guy is obsessed with construction machinery, so he had to supervise the process. And this was the very first time I got to actually try driving this thing, and it was a bit of a trial by fire getting it off of the trailer, but I had watched a bunch of YouTube videos on operating excavators, so I felt pretty much like an expert. After getting it unloaded, I could drive the excavator back to the site, making a pit stop along the way to let little man sit in the driver's seat.
Blade. Drive it.
Once I hopped back in though, I could not for the life of me get the excavator to start back up, and I spent way too long trying to figure this out, thinking maybe the battery had died or the engine had flooded. And after looking through the manual and getting thoroughly frustrated, I finally realized the little lever that engages all the controls has to be in the upright position when starting up the machine. I guess to keep you from accidentally moving the arm during startup, and I had it in the lower engaged position. Once I figured that out, I could finally get to work with the machine, but rather than diving right into digging the footing, since again I had never operated an excavator before, I figured it'd be good practice to finish deconstructing that fire pit area, which I had started in part 1. And this area had to be cleared so the excavator could get to the site anyway, and trying to pick up these small rocks was great practice operating the bucket and moving the arm. And I was able to spend the rest of the afternoon moving all of the rocks out of the way, also digging up a stump and the metal landscaping border around the fire pit while I was at it. The next day, Eric came back over to help with digging the footings, and after removing the string lines, we could get to work. And I should also mention that before we dug these footings, I called 811 to have any buried utilities marked, and we didn't start digging until we were sure this area was clear. First, we needed to grade the area near the end of the building with the highest grade, again to increase the distance between the ground and the floor joists, since that distance has to be 18 inches by code. And and I figured this would be the perfect opportunity to dig a test footing since I had to dig this area down anyway. After digging that trial footing, I got to work moving the dirt, and Eric marked out roughly where I should dig. And this was a decent amount of work because we had to move quite a bit of dirt. And this was made a lot more difficult by the giant stump right in the middle of the site, which I unfortunately didn't have ground down until later in the process. Anyway, after a lot of digging and running the excavator around to compact the dirt, we pulled out the laser to check my work and things looked pretty dang good.
So you're 26, 26, 25, so you're just there.
Wow.
25, 25, wow. You're magic.
Pro grader right here, man.
Eric decided to hop on to finish things up, and also because, honestly, this excavator was a ton of fun to drive. Finally, after getting everything dialed in, we could double check the height of the string line off of the newly graded surface, and with all of our digging, we brought the distance between the ground and the bottom of the floor joist to about 22 inches, which is well over the code requirement of 18 inches. So with that, the grading was done, so we could finally move on to actually digging the footings, which actually went pretty quickly and only took about half a day. First, we remarked the location since the original layout marks had been removed during grading, and then I started digging the footings. And I watched a lot of videos on this process, and while I'm still a definite beginner excavator operator, I figured I'd offer some tips that helped me. So the process that really worked for me was first fully extending the bucket, then placing the teeth in line with where I wanted the edge of the footing to be, lowering the arm until the teeth just contacted the ground, and then curling the bucket to grab the first scoop of dirt. After dumping that first bucket, I repeated the process a second time, again extending the bucket, lowering the bucket so the teeth just contacted, and then curling the bucket again. And because of the curved bottom of the bucket, I would have ended up with sloped walls if I hadn't started digging with the bucket fully extended. After about 6 scoops, 3 scoops per half of the footing, they were ready for Eric to clean up a little bit with a little hand digging, and then I could move on to digging the next footing in the line.
You're good.
Huh?
You're good.
Good?
That's it.
Done?
You're done.
And this process went super quick while Eric was on site to help clean up the holes, but unfortunately he had to run after the first row, so I was on my own for the second row. And working by myself definitely slowed things down quite a bit as I had to get in and out of the excavator to check the size of the holes and also clean out any loose dirt. And these footings also ended up having a lot more roots in them because they were closer to where some of the big trees had been removed, and this made it really hard to get good, clean buckets full of dirt. And after a lot of work cutting roots with a reciprocating saw and clearing out the leftover dirt with a shovel, the footings were dug, and of course, Johnny 5 and my very pregnant wife had to come inspect my work.
All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. This was a really, really cool part of this project. It really, for some reason, made the building very real in my head. Just seeing all of the footing locations laid out, the string line at grade, all of that just really kind of concreted everything in my head. Speaking of concrete, in the next part of the video, I'm gonna be covering getting all of the forms created for these footings, because obviously they had to transfer from the kind of square base of the footing up into these sonotubes. So if you guys haven't already, go ahead and get subscribed and ring that little notification bell so you don't miss the rest of the videos in the series. Also, I have links to all of the tools and materials I use down in the video description below as always. And last, I want to say another huge shout out to AMD, again, who sponsored this video. If you want to learn more about that AMD powered laptop I used, check out the link to that down in the video description below. All right, thanks for watching y'all, and until next week, happy building.